Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining me tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. I have been the Connecticut coastal contact for Old Saybrook and a lot of area towns for many years, too many years to count. And I'm I'm happy to be here and take you through the basics of coastal site plan review tonight. We'll go to the next slide here. We're going to go over the basics tonight, and we'll maybe save some of the other subjects for a deeper dive at a future time, such as water dependent uses and stormwater management, the importance of buffers, those kind of things. But for tonight, we're going to go over what is the commission doing with a coastal site plan when they get it, why is it important, how is it a successful municipal coastal management tool. Obviously, I think of the Connecticut Coastal Management Act in two pieces: to protect and restore coastal resources, and also to protect and promote water dependent uses. Those are the uses that have to be located on the water because they can't go anywhere else. And also, we're obviously looking at construction and flood zones. How do we look at those applications? How are they properly constructed? And what does the CCMA mention, and what tools do we have for looking at those types of applications, as well as shoreline flood and erosion control structures, otherwise known as seawalls, revetments, jetties, groins, riprap, those types of uses where people want to put those, but we have found that they're very problematic over the many years. So again, we're looking to resolve use conflicts on waterfront sites and promote water dependent uses, properly manage coastal flood hazard areas, balance economic growth with resource protection, and all this coastal site plan review process, which is authorized under the Connecticut Coastal Management Act 22A-90. And specifically 22A 105 through 109 are the sections that pertain specifically to planning and zoning commissions and zoning board of appeals in terms of their role for coastal site plan. The benefits are many, of course: protecting coastal resources, improving water quality, protecting and promoting enhancing water dependent uses, increasing coastal public access, and properly managing these flood hazard areas. Again, I tend to think of the Connecticut Coastal Management Act in two pieces: coastal resource protection enhancement as well as water dependent use protection. These are all the designated coastal resources in the Connecticut Coastal Management Act, and all coastal towns, and I think there's 36 in Connecticut, have an area of the coastal boundary, and from the coastal boundary waterward to the Long Island Sound or the Connecticut River, everything is designated as one type of resource or another. So when you get an application, you're going to see that people are checking off certain resources. Not every site is going to have everything, of course. We hope not. But these will be the resources that are on the coastal resources map. This will be what an applicant looks for when they're, looking at their marina or a grocery store addition or a single family house, whatever the application is, and they're going to be checking off and reviewing the specific policies that go with that particular coastal resource, to make sure that what they're proposing is consistent with that policy. And sometimes there's more than one policy. So I'm just going to run through what some typical coastal resources look like. Back in 1980, when they did the original mapping, there was obviously many areas that were already developed, and those are mapped as developed shorefront. And you might not think of that as a resource, but when you look at this picture, you see the water, and obviously water quality could potentially be an issue with a redevelopment or an addition to even areas that are already developed. So we're going to be looking more like for stormwater or even coastal hazard area consistency and NFIP, FEMA consistency, that kind of thing. So other resources are shellfish concentration areas. Obviously, intertidal flats are incredibly biologically productive and worthy of our protection. Estuarine embayments is just another name for coastal waters under the coastal resources map. So that's any kind of coastal water area. There's islands, of course, bluffs and escarpments, coastal hazard areas. I believe this picture is from Connecticut, probably one of the towns I used to work with in East Haven, who suffered quite a bit during Irene and then Sandy, and as well as many towns. So coastal hazard areas are actually defined as the 100-year floodplain areas, both A and B zone, velocity zone areas along the waterfront. So you'll tend to get a lot of, most sites I review do have flood zones in them, and we're looking carefully at FEMA construction, as well as the Connecticut Coastal Management Act talks about minimizing threats to life and property, which goes a little further than simply meeting the FEMA standards and construction for NFIP. Beaches and dunes are considered very important as well. We promote them to be used as a non-structural solution to erosion problems. You might see them in certain living shoreline type applications sometimes, and are a nice alternative to a seawall because they often, plants do an amazing job at securing soil and keeping sandy areas in place. So we're looking to promote those and protect them wherever we can. Tidal wetlands I think of as sort of the crown jewel of coastal resources in Connecticut. Again, incredibly biologically productive. They're nursery areas. They provide important habitat for all kinds of marine organisms and wildlife species. They are easy to recognize. They have, in this picture here, the two primary vegetation types are Spartina patens and Spartina alterniflora. And then there's many others, of course, on the list for under the Tidal Wetlands Act. But those are the primary two. And then you can also see Phragmites here on the fringe, which is an invasive, which we are always trying to manage and minimize as much as we can so it doesn't outcompete our native species. They're also important for flood storage and flood protection and attenuating wave action during storms to protect upland development. And we're also seeing that we're losing tidal wetlands in the state of Connecticut. This is a little bit more evident in the western end of the sound where the tidal range is greater. But we're seeing areas being drowned out a bit, and we are also looking to protect our borderlands so that eventually tidal wetlands have a place to migrate to. And again, shorelands is for a coastal resource is an area that does not include a flood hazard area, and they just didn't know what else to call it, I think, under the Coastal Management Act. So we got shorelands. So, and again, water dependent uses by definition are the uses and facilities that have to require direct access to or location in marine or tidal waters. And by definition, it also includes general public access. And that's important because there'll be some sites that may not be suitable for an active water dependent use like a marina, but say there's a subdivision and wetlands and maybe some public access would be a way to satisfy that criteria. The CCMA does require that commissions and boards give priority consideration to those uses that require a waterfront location. So this is something that needs to be looked at for all waterfront sites. And waterfront sites also include tidal wetlands. So just running through some pictures here of some typical water dependent uses, of course, commercial fishing facilities, Port and ferry facilities like the State Pier in New London that we've heard so much about of late, recreational marinas, shipyards and boat maintenance facilities, and industries that are really dependent on waterborne transportation, such as a tank farm. And again, general public access by definition is included, and we were giving out these signs for many years. I think we still have a few left, and you can go online to the DEP bookstore and order some as well for if commissions do acquire public access and do want it signed. We do have these sign designs available. In terms of basics of coastal site plan, I think this is an interesting picture because it's something you may not see every day, but we certainly do. Our office regulates all activities in tidal wetlands directly through our permitting program, as well as below the coastal jurisdiction line. And in this case, you can see that many of these houses in Stratford are almost completely regulated by our office. So it's not that unusual that we will regulate homes. And that's something to keep in mind for a complete application, is that we do like to see where the coastal jurisdiction line and high tide line is. Coastal jurisdiction line and any tidal wetlands that might be growing on a site, because sometimes they'll be pretty close, if not under homes or other buildings. So in terms of a coastal site plan, this is stuff that the staff in your towns do a great job with already, figuring out whether a coastal site plan is exempt or not. Does it require authorization from DEP and Land and Water Resources Division, our office that does the permitting? Is there like a wall on site that the water is right there, or docks or groins or those kind of things? So those are things that when I get a referral for a coastal site plan, I'm going to be looking at our DEP SIMS database, and we are available for consults on that, of course. And then we're going to be looking to see if there is a dock on site. Even if it's been there a while, it may not have a permit. So are there violations on the site? That's something that might be happening. We're looking for the application to be complete. Did they actually fill out the application? Sometimes I get them and they just say NA, NA, NA all the way through it. So, you want to make sure that they're looking at what the coastal resources are on and contiguous to the site, that they're looking up the policy, and they're doing some type of determination as to whether it's consistent or not. And there are only two types of mandatory referrals. I'll reiterate this later, but there's anything to do with a shoreline flood and erosion control structure has to come up to us and be here 35 days before the scheduling of the local public hearing, as well as zone changes that would affect any area within the coastal boundary area of your town, which again is about 1,000 feet back, more or less, from the edge of the water, and is legally defined on a map. And how do you go about evaluating the proposal is what we'll go on to next. But before that, I just want to mention this slide, which I think there's, this is often confusing to people, and understandably so. But DEP, we regulate to what's called the coastal jurisdiction line. That is a fixed number elevation. And in Old Saybrook, for instance, I believe it's 2.9, if I'm remembering correctly.
Correct.
That's in reference to a datum called NAVB. So we regulate from that line waterward, whereas the town regulates from mean high water landward. So in an area like this on a beach, you're going to get you could get a considerable area of overlap between those two, with those jurisdictions, that where we're both regulating the same swath of area. However, when you look at a bulkhead or a seawall, like in the upper right-hand corner with this rock seawall, the coastal jurisdiction line and mean high water are going to line up such that they're going to be on top of each other, basically. And so on a site plan, they'll look like they are the same line. So that's just something to keep in mind, that, with a vertical facing whatever, you're going to get the lines closer together, and on a very gently sloping area, it's not necessarily going to happen. There'll be no area of overlap. In these pictures, everything here is pretty much regulated by our office, the permitting section. You know, bulkheads, docks, even the public access bridge down below, or jetty or groin, they're all regulated structures here. These are the types of uses that are subject to coastal site plan. This is in the statute as well as your zoning. And it basically includes a lot of things that both planning, zoning, and ZBA will look at. Obviously, for ZBA, it'll be variances, but all these other, you know, subdivision, a planning commission may look at, or planning and zoning, depending on which town we're talking about. Any kind of use structure, certainly shoreline flood and erosion control structures, which are a mandatory referral. And then there'll be exemptions to that. And that was something that staff will look at over and make sure if it's exempt, it will be exempt. Minor additions to structures, construction of a single family home that's greater than 100 feet from certain resources, and then minor changes to uses of buildings can all be exempt. Also, for preserving coastal resources, those activities might be exempt, as well as gardening and grazing and crops. Again, these are all in the zoning regulations. So for me, you know, the text of an application is important. I do read it, but I do find that I get most of my information from a very good site plan, which is not as easy to come by as you might think sometimes. So we need to see all the activities on the site, as well as the resources on and contiguous to the site. This is required as part of a complete application. So in this picture, we have a building, we have mean high water. I'm not seeing the coastal jurisdiction line. I'm not maybe seeing all the flood zones. So, you know, that could be an incomplete application. So in this instance, as we filled that in, now we see above the red line, this building is subject to both A and V zone. It's partially in both zones, but the more restrictive velocity zone standards for NFIP FEMA will apply. So the whole building has to meet velocity zone requirements, for instance, being built on piers, or pilings with breakaway walls, utilities elevated above base flood elevation, that kind of thing. And if you're just looking at this generally, you know, you may be saying, wow, that building is pretty close to the tidal wetland. And for instance, I know Old Saybrook has a 50-foot setback, but that might be, if there's opportunity to maintain setbacks as much as possible, certainly that'll go a long way to protect the resource. There's been many studies to show that buffers are obviously very important, and we'll hear more about that with the Gateway Commission role in that as well in a few minutes. But again, you know, you can ask lots of questions, and you can ask about grading and filling, and do they have sedimentation erosion control? What are they doing with their stormwater, and how is it changing? Are they increasing impervious area? These are all the kinds of questions that I often look for. And you know, again, we want to see that they're thinking about the project and consistency before submitting an application. We're looking for these basic jurisdictional lines, coastal jurisdiction line, mean high water as a jurisdiction for the town, FEMA information, sedimentation, erosion control, and grading plans. We're also looking for stormwater management measures. This may not be as big an issue on a single family house application, but for things that get larger, we definitely, and even at single family level, we're looking for not to have sort of the traditional or old school type of stormwater system where it just gets shunted by a pipe to the nearest stormwater system or to a brook or a water course, or certainly a tidal wetland. Even treated stormwater can pollute a tidal wetland because it's very dependent on salt water. So we're looking for, you know, alternatives to traditional stormwater management. We're looking for LID, low impact development, minimizing impervious areas, providing bioswales or rain gardens or other kind of actually often lower cost and easier to maintain options. So, you know, we're really encouraged, and I have seen quite a bit of improvement over the years with this change coming, which has been nice. And also not for every single site again, but for those that are more natural sites or undisturbed sites, we're going to be looking, you know, for the NDDB information through DEP, not my office, but are there any endangered or threatened species on the site, and do they need to be specifically managed for? And then again, for larger projects, I particularly like to see and ask for kind of timing and methods of construction phasing, because it really, that helps complete the picture for me for a tricky site, like exactly when are they going to do it and how are they going to do it is helpful to know. And then again, we have this checklist, which we can provide if for some reason some commission members don't have it, but it's a complete list of what's required for a complete coastal site plan application. Again, the mandatory referrals are zoning amendments, even to plan of conservation and development, shoreline flood and erosion control structures of any kind, seawalls, additions to seawalls to make them higher, big rocks in front of the existing seawall is all an addition. So that would be subject to the mandatory referral up to our office. And we have some very strict policies regarding these, which I'll get into in a few minutes. And we also like to see waterfront projects and projects containing or abutting tidal wetlands and all major projects. And we tend to respond with either a checklist or a letter. I tend to like to respond with emails to commissions, and I try to keep them as short as possible. At least they're shorter than they used to be. And in terms of analyzing, you know, again, is there development close to sensitive resources? Is there steep slopes? Because that's just going to make everything much more tricky. Are they proposing to cut and fill and disturb and soils? This surprisingly is often, not often, but more often than I would like to see, is not really detailed. So it's good to really understand exactly what are they proposing to cut down? What are they proposing to plant if they're going to do like some kind of riparian buffer or something to sort of offset what they're doing in order to protect the nearby resources or water quality. It's really helpful to really understand that as part of a grading and cutting and filling. And then of course, really would prefer not to see much increase at all in impervious cover, if at all possible. Something to keep in mind is if it disturbs greater than 5 acres, it may require a DEP stormwater general permit. And again, we love buffers. I actually have a fact sheet on this. I don't provide that often to towns, but there's many studies and probably some new studies that I'm not even aware of that talk about the incredibleness of vegetated buffer areas to do nutrient uptake, pollutant uptake, provide habitat, all kinds of things. And simply, you know, whatever fits. I know a lot of zones, lot sizes are very small, that's okay. Even a 5 or 10 foot wide buffer of shrubs, not necessarily trees, native, non-invasive, can do wonders to protect. And also just hold the line so people are not as likely to keep filling out, which we used to jokingly refer to as the foot of the month club. But it does happen where people, you know, are just kind of infringing on resource areas. So these buffers serve many values to incorporate in a project. Okay. Again, are they only providing traditional stormwater management techniques, or are they trying to incorporate some LID through minimizing impervious impervious, and providing other options such as even rain barrels or rain gardens or bioswales or even just grass swales. Is the stormwater being directed to the resources? Because that's something, especially over a steep or erodible slope, that's a problem. And what best management practices are they proposing? Is there soil and erosion control? And is there any opportunity to improve? Sometimes when there's redevelopments at a site, they want to just sort of stick with the very baseline they're at and then just not add to the problem, which is great, and that's important. But sometimes there is opportunities for other types of restoration, and that's something to be looking for and just to talk to the applicant about. In terms of water dependent uses, again, any site is, waterfront site is going to be viewed against policies for water dependent use protection and enhancement. Commission members are required to give priority consideration at waterfront sites for water dependent uses. And then there's certain adverse impacts that are actually defined in the Act regarding like replacing a water dependent use with a non-water dependent use. That's a defined adverse impacts that requires avoiding or minimizing it at the minimum. And is the site suitable for public access? Do some of your town plans talk about public access and where they'd like to see it? What is the plan? Does your Harbor Management Commission support a certain plan? These are all things that you can point to or be familiar with and behind as part of when you're looking at a particular coastal site plan. So again, with coastal hazard areas, can the house be moved back? Can it just be moved back as much as possible? Sometimes you can move it right out of a flood hazard area. I've seen situations where homes are proposed where they always were, but if they just moved 10 feet away, they'd be out of the flood hazard area, the 100-year floodplain altogether. And that's a great move because they're going to save themselves a bundle of money too for their FEMA and FIP premiums, which are only going up, as we know. So, and then are they increasing potential hazards to life? Are they tearing down and building a significantly larger home within a V zone, a velocity zone, which is subject to direct wave action, the most dangerous flood zone? That's tricky. And are they doing that on a non-conforming lot where they're going to require a lot of variances to fit something much larger in than the underlying zoning really allows for? So these are all considerations. And are they proposing a structural solution to flooding and erosion, or could they simply maybe either move the home back, elevate the home, or do a non-structural solution like core logs or something more vegetated along the edge of the shore, even a living shoreline perhaps. I've seen them on small scale sites as well, as a way to offset that and be consistent with the policies. So again, we're just winding down here. I'm almost done. Tools for coastal hazard mitigation. I was going to go and do a little deeper dive on this tonight, and then I realized for time's sake that maybe we'll do it at a future time, another workshop if people are interested in this. But this has to do with FEMA and shoreline flood and erosion control structures. And, basically, as you may be aware, many decades ago, even the Army Corps of Engineers, many environmental organizations realized that these hardened structures, these seawalls, often create more problems than they solve. With the energy that hits the wall and disperses that, we often see impacts to the resources right in front of the wall. We see impacts to the neighbors on either side. And again, the test is that they have to be absolutely necessary and unavoidable for certain uses, water dependent uses, infrastructure like a sewer line or a road, or commercial residential structures that were built before 1995. But even in those cases, again, they have to be necessary and unavoidable. So they don't really have a demonstrated show of erosion. then that's going to be a tough burden to overcome. They also have to show that in addition to, even if they do meet this category of uses, there has to be no feasible, less environmentally damaging alternative in addition to, and then all mitigation measures on top of that have to be included. So this is a nice checklist. I have this too, if anybody would like it. And it kind of brings you through. And what are some of the alternatives? Maybe they could, again, move the home back, elevate the home, or maybe create a dune or something along the edge of the area. One problem we do see often is that people want to put in a higher or newer seawall, and they also are building their house to now fee zone standards for the first time. And that seawall, in essence, becomes an obstruction under FEMA. And that's a problem. And some of you may know Diane Ivkovic of our office, who's the NFIP coordinator for the state of Connecticut. I run things by her sometimes when I have questions, because I'm not the expert in that area, and she certainly is. But that's, we could do a deeper workshop at some point on this particular issue all by itself if we wanted to. But I will just mention that not to be fooled when you get an application that says living shoreline on it. Always check with us, because sometimes, and not in this case, not Fenwick, but in other cases we have seen site plans refer to us, and there's like basically a brand new seawall or huge revetment up on the land above our jurisdiction, and someone will, propose to put sand on top of it with a little bit of switchgrass on top, and they're going to call it a living shoreline, and it is not a living shoreline. The living shoreline looks more like this. This is one some of you may be familiar with at the mouth of the Connecticut River in Fenwick, just to the east of the former Katharine Hepburn estate as part of the Lynn Land Trust. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So as it was being built, you'll see, and the primary purpose for living shorelines is to restore and enhance certain coastal resources. So we're inevitably going to be in the driver's seat, almost always permitting these things, because it has to enhance or create tidal wetlands, intertidal flats, beaches and dunes, those kind of resources. Okay, beaches and dunes maybe could be built outside of our jurisdiction, okay. But if you put sand over a rock wall, it's not a dune anymore. So in this case, you can see in picture 1, there's like 9 sills being proposed here. Those are the kind of like riprap piles of stone offshore, and that will attenuate some of the wave and storm action. And this place has really gotten nailed for many, many years. So they've tried various methods, and this is the latest one, and hopefully it'll hold for a little while. There's no guarantees with Mother Nature, as we know, but so far so good. So in picture 2 here, they finished the 9 sills. They are constructing the intertidal flat and tidal wetland area, putting in the dune. And then by picture 4, they've actually moved Crab Creek to the north. And again, this is what we were seeing, was many storms in a row were filling in that creek, which I don't have a picture of here, and blocking flow to the pond, which is behind the Hepburn estate, to the point where, because dunes do want to migrate inland, and they were going to keep filling this in. So we decided, as part of this, it wasn't originally part of the application, but as part of this, Crab Creek got relocated to the north. So next time we can talk more about coastal hazards, shoreline flood and erosion control structures, water dependent uses, non-point source pollution, stormwater, setbacks, buffers, habitat restoration. There's a lot, and there's even more than that our office is involved with, but I think we will stop there, and I will turn it over to Torrance.
So Chris, we'll do questions afterwards, after both presentations.
Well, there's some hands raised now, one hand raised.
Do you want to go ahead and
do it? Marcy, are you prepared for questions now, or do you want to wait till the end?
Sure. Either way, it's fine. Either way is fine.
So I see Chubb Wilcox has his hand raised.
Chubb, do you have a question?
He's muted.
Can you hear?
Oh,
We did.
Go ahead and unmute, Chubb.
Are we there? Are we unmuted?
Mhm.
Okay. Marcy, I want to thank you. I've seen a few of your letters as I sit on the Zoning Board of Appeals of Old Saybrook. And the thing I would ask you to do is give us a little bit of guidance or help on the height of the plantings that you suggest. We see suggestions for, native plants to provide a buffer, but
mhm.
people who buy along the shoreline want to maintain their view. And I confess that I am at a loss as to, what is the height that is going to be the mature result of the plantings that might be involved. It would be a very big help to me if you could provide us with a little bit of guidance about, is something going to grow to a height of 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, 5 feet? That would be
Right.
a great help.
Okay, well, I can certainly look into that. I don't know the answer offhand. I know that there are several plant guides for Connecticut, specific to Connecticut. And of course, we have, and once in a while, I'll send that along. The Yukon, Juliana Barrett put together a coastal riparian tool website, which is great because any homeowner can kind of come up with designing their own. And I bet you it will have some height information in that, but I haven't really looked for it. But that's a good point in terms of height. Because I can understand that. I can certainly understand people don't want, that's why I say it doesn't necessarily have to be trees unless it's, we will get into that in a minute with the gateway. That's a little different, but it just has to be, native, non-invasive, ideally, or at least non-invasive.
Right. I appreciate that.
Sure. I'll see what I can come up with for you.
Thanks a lot.
Sure.
I'm going to mute again.
Are there any other questions? We've got one, Jackie.
Jackie, did you have a question? Jacqueline?
I just wanted to know if the slideshow is going to be available as an attachment or available to Chris to distribute.
It will be on the YouTube site. I don't know how long they hold on to those, but I did ask Larry Hayden if there was a way that we could keep recordings in case YouTube takes it off of their site.
Okay.
So immediately, yes, I don't know how long these YouTube videos stay live.
I was just wondering if there would be a distribution of the actual slideshow presentation.
So I took a.
Well, I was just going to say I could certainly provide what I have if
Okay.
I tried to email it to you today. It didn't go through. I don't think we could work on that again.
Okay. Just like almost like clip notes of highlights of your presentation. That would be helpful just to have on hand.
Sure.
All right, great. Thank
Absolutely.
you for your presentation.
Sure.
Hey, that's all the questions we have.
I think at this point we hand it over to Torrance. Explain the gateway.
Good. Hello, everybody. There are a few folks from other towns other than Old Saybrook, because we sent the invitation for this to all the Gateway members, as well as to the land use staff in the other 7 Gateway member towns. And as I said, there are a few there. And I'll note that Suzanne Thompson is on the call. She is the chairman of the Gateway Commission. She's the representative from Old Lyme. And Bill Webb and Diane Stover are also in attendance. They're your 2 Old Saybrook representatives. So I'll run through a PowerPoint that I have that will start with a little bit of History 101, because it's pertinent to how Gateway came to be. And it's important to your understanding of Gateway's mission and why this came up in the first place. So I'm going to share. All right, and slideshow. Okay, yay, it worked. Gateway Commission, there's a picture of the lower Connecticut River estuary with Old Saybrook on the right-hand side, and the lower part of Lord's Cove, Lyme, and Old Lyme on the left. Many of you know me, some don't, but this is a quick background. I've been working in land use in Old Saybrook, and then with the state of Connecticut, and now with RiverCog and Gateway since, well, 1988. And that's when I was the zoning enforcement officer in Old Saybrook. Then 5 years as a colleague of Marcy's at DEP. And since 95, and now the deputy director at RiverCog. And just as a little note down at the bottom, I like to note that I'm a sometime actor and artist of the Long Island Sound Preserve, the sound license plate. So that happened in my time at the DEP. Little discussion, and many of you probably are aware of this. We call this the Connecticut River Trophy case. And you can read there that there, since the 90s, there have been a number of accolades given to the Connecticut River, in some cases the entire Connecticut River, and in others the estuary. And I'm sure you're familiar with most of these. One interesting one is the Department of the Interior's designation of the Connecticut River as a national blueway. That became a political hot button topic, so they dismantled that program, but the Connecticut River remained as the only national blueway river. So that's thrown in to our trophy case as well. And obviously, all of these accolades, you all know that the lower Connecticut River and the entire Connecticut River is such an incredibly special place. The original reason for the Gateway Compact was back in the late 60s, the federal government planned to establish a national park along the entire length of the Connecticut River, 410 miles from Canada down to the mouth of the river. And it was going to be divided into 4 discrete units. The Gateway unit was the one that pretty closely aligns with what the Gateway Conservation Zone is now. That national park effort failed in all 4 of the New England towns that the Connecticut, or states that the Connecticut River passed through. So down here in the local, in the estuary region, local leaders instead came up with state legislation to protect the Gateway unit, the lowest of the 4 in the lower river. And they were environmental leaders, and they went to the legislature and had that legislation adopted. And what they did was they retained the conservation aspects of that federal plan, but they omitted the tourism related provisions. If that federal park passed, I'm sure you're all familiar with the preserve, the central location of the park headquarters would have been up at the preserve. And you know, it was thought that there would be so much traffic and so many visitors that it would overwhelm our state roads and our small town centers. So the legislation that we have now in the state statutes is the conservation portion of that federal legislation. The legislation was adopted in 1974. You can see the citation, and as with the Coastal Management Act and all your planning and zoning efforts and Gateway, what we can do in the state of Connecticut is authorized in state statutes. So that is the backpinning to all that we can do. Gateway is comprised of 8 member towns, and each of those towns in 1974 voted at town meeting to join this compact. So it wasn't a regional or state effort that was foisted upon the towns. The towns actually voted at town meeting to join the Gateway Compact. And there you see the list of the 8 towns, goes north to Haddam and East Haddam. As I said, voluntary town membership, and the support was based on the towns looking for the aid of Gateway in protecting their shorelines from unwanted development. There was an example of a bridge that was to be proposed from Old Saybrook over to Long Island. At one point early on, there was discussion of possible oil tank farms down in Old Saybrook. And at one point where the marinas up in Essex, the yacht clubs, there were oil tanks up there at one point years ago. The Gateway Commission and Gateway staff assists and advises town commissions, boards, and staff, and in return, the commissions and boards support Gateway recommendations and requests for approval conditions. And I'll get into that a little later. Chris Costa and I and the staff in the other 8 towns, Carrie Duquesne is the CEO up in Essex, for instance, she's on the call. We closely coordinate. A lot of work is done at the staff level for Gateway, and Chris and Marcy from DEP, but Chris has been a great supporter, and we work closely together to make sure that the Gateway partnership runs smoothly in Old Saybrook. And Chris and I also assist property owners, architects, engineers, the applicants that you'll see. And our efforts are to help them with designs that will be most acceptable and most approvable. So that's a service that we provide as well. As for the Gateway Commission, there are 2 appointed members from each of the 8 towns, 1 representative, 1 alternate. There are 4 regional members appointed by my agency, RiverCog. And there's also a representative of the Commission of the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. David Blatt is the outgoing representative of the commissioner. He's retiring in April. We're all sorry to see him go. Katie Perzanowski is on the call too. She will be stepping in as the commissioner's representative. So there are 21 members of the Gateway Commission all told, and most meetings, most of those members attend, and it's really a testament to their devotion to protection of the Lower Connecticut River. As I said, Bill Webb is your representative and Diane Stober is the alternate. On any votes taken, the representative is the vote for the town. If the representative isn't at the meeting or recuses themselves for some reason, then the alternate votes in their place. The legislation that I referred to back in 1974, these couple of paragraphs are basically from the very first paragraph of the statute. And you can see the 4 terms there. That is basically Gateway's mission to protect the scenic, ecological, scientific, and historic value within the conservation zone of the lower river. And it further goes on to say that it is in the public interest to preserve the values and to prevent deterioration. And this term here you see in many of the letters that Gateway sends, protection of the natural and traditional river scene for the enjoyments of present and future generations of citizens. So it's this first paragraph, the legislative finding of the General Assembly and the mission, where Gateway gets its marching orders, basically. The conservation zone boundary, I think you're all familiar that it's within that boundary that you will have applications to review and regulation proposals to look at. The boundary was established in 1973 with local input from all 8 towns. So it wasn't established by the Gateway Committee at that time or the commission itself. There was input from town residents. And the conservation zone, simply the hillsides that you can see from the river and from properties across the river up to the first ridge line. In Saybrook, that boundary description includes the borough of Fenwick. And basically that's a map of the 8 towns that shows the colored area that is the conservation zone boundary. You can't really see much from that particular map. Gateway, 2-pronged protection. One part of their program is land protection. Gateway has participated in the acquisition and protection through scenic easements and development easements of over 1,200 acres in the conservation zone using $1.2 approximately $1 million of their own funds. In Old Saybrook, the most recent funding was for the purchase of the Saybrook Point property that's just north of the old Dock and Dine property, that little triangular piece. The Gateway Commission donated funds to the town of Old Saybrook for the purchase. The other prong is, all right, I'll go back there. The other prong of protection are the minimum zoning standards that most of you are familiar with. Those are the standards that are adopted into the Gateway regulations. This is a map of your zoning layer in your GIS, and there is a green line on there that shows the conservation zone as well as all your zoning. It's a little tough to kind of see with all that information there. So what I did was put together a map for you that shows Old Saybrook, and you can see the green line that traces where the boundary is. So everything east of that green boundary, adjacent to the river and your coves, is in the conservation zone. So that's where when an application is submitted for a special permit, for instance, or a petition for zoning regulations or for variances, if they impact any of the properties east of that line, Chris Costa and land use staff know that those applications get referred to the Gateway Commission for us to process. And just one note, there are at times questions of, how was the boundary established? And you can see up here that the boundary in the northern part follows Middlesex Turnpike, and then over Essex Road, then Ferry Road, and then the railroad as you come by Ragged Rock Creek, and then the shorelines in North and South Cove. And then the boundary also includes the borough of Fenwick, as you can see down there. So that's the area within which the Gateway Commission has its jurisdiction. So the Gateway standards, the Gateway by statute has the authority to adopt minimum zoning standards that are to be quote unquote promptly adopted into each member town's zoning regulations. And that's the statutory citation. In your zoning regulations in Old Saybrook, it's section 58. Each of the member towns, including Old Saybrook, have adopted the minimum standards. And I did want to note that Saybrook is the only one of the 8 that voluntarily adopted 2 more stringent standards to be more protective than the minimum standards. The most commonly seen standards that you'll come across are the conservation zone structure setback. That's buildings that are built adjacent to the river, its coves or marshes have to be set back 100 feet. There's the required vegetated buffer. Marcy mentioned that in her presentation, and I have a slide on that to talk about that. The minimum standard for the other towns that they adopted is 50 feet. As I said, Saybrook went the extra mile and said, no, we're going to protect 100 feet. And that's a substantial area and very important to the water quality of the river. Special permit for dwellings. When a structure, residential structure, is over 3,500 square feet in total area, there's a requirement for the local zoning authority, in the case of Saybrook, the zoning commission, to perform a special permit application, and that includes a public hearing. Building coverage limit 15% in most of the areas where Saybrook's coverage is 20%. Maximum structure height 35 feet, and that's measured from existing natural grade. There are 9 of these review standards for those special permits that I mentioned. So the required vegetated buffer and the special permit trip point are the 2 stronger standards. The minimum standard is 4,000 square feet for special permits for dwellings. As I said, the other 7 towns use 4,000. Saybrook uses 3,500. So more applications would come to the zoning commission, but they feel that's the best thing to do. Now, the required vegetated buffer I just mentioned and that Marcy mentioned, in Old Saybrook, that's 100 feet. And it's an area where within that 100 feet, there's to be no cutting of any of the vegetation. And a lot of it people look at and say, well, it's only scrubby or, brush. But that's important vegetation that stabilizes, the hillsides adjacent to the river and the coves and marshes, and prevents, for instance, erosion products from washing down into, those resources. And another important factor that Marcy mentioned is that many of the lawns along the conservation zone are, they're beautiful lawns. And, I'm not judgmental about beautiful lawns, but many lawns are maintained with fertilizers and pesticides. So that 100-foot required vegetative buffer is a real help in maintaining water quality in the lower Connecticut River. There is an exception that property owners can clear a 5-foot pathway to access the water. And the other thing Gateway likes to teach people in commissions is that the trees that are within that 100-foot required vegetated buffer, they can't be cut, but they can be limbed up. So the lower third, what we tell property owners is that the most common reason to want to get rid of the trees is so they can have the view that they paid for in these very expensive properties. And as Marcy said, we get that. But in the case of this required vegetated buffer, what they're entitled to do without any permits is cut the limbs on the lower third of the tree so the trees stay in place and buffer the view as seen from the river and across the river, but the property owners can get a view out to the river. And they will often say, well, we paid for that. So I get it. Well, here's what we can do for you. These are the only 2 pictures I was going to show to you. I showed this to the ZBA a couple of years ago. This is not in the conservation zone, but this is an example of the difference between leaving trees in place and cutting them down. Admittedly, most of these houses aren't of the size that you see along the Connecticut River, but it gives you a good idea that if you, in the top photo, remove the limbs on the lower third, they're going to be able to see out to the marsh in this case. The lower one shows you what houses would look like where they remove the trees. And it's that view of the development that Gateway tries to protect by requesting that trees be left in place, and in the required vegetated buffer require that those trees be left in place. So trees and vegetation are a really important part of the Gateway program. For the zoning commission, the 2 most common types of applications that you will see that require Gateway involvement are the first one, any zoning regulation amendments or changes to the zoning map. And the other, as I've just said, is review of residential dwellings over 3,000 square feet in total area. That's not footprint, that's total mass of the building. For the regulations, the statutes require that or state that no regulation that impacts properties within the conservation zone can become effective without first gaining the approval of the Gateway Commission. So that means that if a petitioner, for instance, comes in to change a regulation that affects Gateway zone properties, the zoning commission could go through and approve that locally, but then the Gateway Commission has to approve it as consistent with the Gateway mission, or those regulations don't become effective. It means they won't go into the zoning regulation book. And thankfully, through Chris and the zoning commission, the zoning commission and Gateway work very closely so that there's very seldom a time where the zoning commission would approve a regulation and the Gateway Commission would not approve it. They work together, as it says in the bottom. Staff and the zoning commission coordinate pre-submission to try to iron out any potential issues so that there's no disagreement over whether Gateway would approve one of those zoning regulations. The special permits, as I said, 3,500 square feet. Chris sends the applications to Gateway for advisory comments. We will review those and make suggestions to the Gateway Commission or the Zoning Commission, but the comments that you'll get are just advisory. The comments that will be provided assist the Zoning Commission in identifying if the project is consistent with the adopted Gateway standards, and Zoning Commission members will likely be familiar with the fact that when you get one of those letters from me, there are often conditions that the Gateway Commission would request that the Zoning Commission apply to the approval. Gateway has no authority to apply conditions in those cases, so Gateway will ask the Zoning Commission. This project is generally consistent, but what will make it better is if you condition an approval to retain all trees between the house and the river, or actually plant some more vegetation. So that's often the kind of letter you'll see from Gateway on that type of special exception application. For the Zoning Board of Appeals, the most common, actually, I think the only application would be when a variance application comes in and those variances are requested for properties in the conservation zone. Chris and the staff in the land use department know that that gets referred to Gateway, to the Gateway Commission for comments. What you'll usually get, as the ZBA members will know, is that these reviews are and comments are submitted in a letter to the ZBA that comes in during your public hearing, and you'll get one of three kinds of letters. One would be no objection to approval of the variances, and that's for cases where the application project is something minimal or really can't be seen to any significant degree from the river. The second kind is probably the most common, no objection to the ZBA approving the variances if certain conditions are applied. And again, that's in many cases retention of trees and planting of vegetation. Sometimes it may be suggestions about a structure being painted a darker color so it's not as intrusive to the view. That might be something that I would work out with an applicant ahead of time. I would ask, would you have any problem painting this natural brown instead of white? And most of the time they'd say, yeah, we can do that. And so then a letter would say the applicant has agreed to, and we would appreciate you condition the approval to acknowledge what was agreed in our discussions. The final is really an uncommon letter where the Gateway Commission would send a letter objecting to the approval of an application because the project would be considered by Gateway to be one that would adversely impact the view of the property from the river. Too much development in an area where it's natural might be an example like that, but you don't often receive those kind of letters. Again, the placement of conditions often has to do with vegetation, and it's an effort to increase the protection of, and there's that terminology, the natural and traditional river scene. The ZBA is to make findings of consistency with the project with the Gateway mission of protection. That's in the statute. As I said, significant protection for variance application is often through the conditions that we request. And as I said, the most common conditions refer to vegetation, keeping mature trees and planting of additional vegetation. So that is, that's my basic background of the responsibilities of the Zoning Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals, the kind of things you'll see and the kind of responses you'll get from the Gateway Commission. And I would open up to any questions that anyone may have.
Bill wanted to add something. Bill, you had your hand up? You need to unmute.
Go, Bill.
I didn't raise my hand, but
Okay.
I would, I guess I would add one thing, a couple things, which would be that when the commission reviews changes in regulation, we really are trying to understand that the regulations are not countering our minimal standards. Torrance, that's fair to say, right? And that we don't try and say everything on our mind. We really try and focus on that. Torrance, do you think it's appropriate to talk about any of our new ideas, or better wait till they're more formulated?
No, I think that's appropriate. The Gateway Commission, through the Rules and Procedures Committee, which is Bill is the chairman of that group, have been thinking about regulations concerning light pollution. And actually, the commission has given the go-ahead to have those regulations reviewed by council. And as a matter of fact, Gateway's counsel is Mark Brantz, the same counsel as the zoning commission, and Matt Willis is also one of counsel for the Gateway Commission as well. So Gateway has just developed a light pollution definition and a 10th standard that will be added to the list that a zoning commission will use to review structures over residential structures over 3,500 square feet. We reached out a number of months ago and asked staff what they thought about that, and asked them to ask their commissions if that was something that they thought they could support. And we generally received a positive response to that. So the Rules Committee and the Gateway Commission has moved forward to develop that language, and that language will be sent out to the commissions to look at and hopefully support. The Gateway Commission, in adopting its minimum standards, endeavors to never surprise a commission with a new standard. It's always discussed ahead of time, and if any standard that the Gateway Commission was interested in resulted in some pushback from the local commissions, the Gateway Commission would likely try to rethink what they were proposing to do, because the Gateway Commission and the local zoning commissions, P&Zs, work together as a partnership. So it's always cooperative, and whenever Gateway has an idea about new standards, they will vet them first and work in collaboration before the local towns are asked to adopt these new standards. So the lighting standards are new and will be brought to you at some time soon. And just briefly, there have been a number of cases where property owners along the river like to architecturally light their structures. You know, they're beautiful designs, and in a lot of cases they're very large structures, and the feeling is that, you know, architectural lighting isn't necessary and produces a lot of light pollution, especially when it flows out into the river area. So that's something the Gateway Commission would like to try to manage a little better. And there is a lot of support, sustainable CT, there's a lot of support. There are standards out there for reducing light pollution, but that, I think, is mainly what Bill is referring to.
And Suzanne's hand is raised. Suzanne, our chair.
Yes, I don't want to interrupt any discussion here, but I just wanted to say that speaking to you from the shores of Old Lyme across the river, I'm so happy that we're addressing both the coastal and the Connecticut River Gateway Zone regulations and situations, because regardless of the amount of the salt in the water, they're all interrelated, and there are different jurisdictions for protecting those waters and those lands. I wanted to say I really appreciate the question coming from the question about riparian buffers and how tall the plants. That is a sensitivity. I'm a gardener. I'm a professional gardener and garden writer. Many of the invasive species that we're dealing with in the riparian buffers get quite tall. Phragmites, knotweed, the tree of heaven, Allianthus can get 40, 50 feet tall, but there are many good native choices, lower shrubs. And I think that that is a challenge and an opportunity for the many resources that can provide information about this, whether it is your pollinator pathway, sustainable CT, conservation commission in your town. I think that even though we are basically a bulk density regulatory agency and organization, that is what the Gateway Commission standards have predominantly addressed. So many of the questions that are coming up now are ecological. It has to do with lighting. It has to do with native ecosystems and ecology and plants. And we have many partners that we need to figure out how we can work together and help the coastal communities and the communities in the Connecticut River Gateway Zone do the right things. To indeed balance growth, also deal with climate change, deal with the pressure of invasive species. So I appreciate that the program has been recorded tonight. It might be a model for some of the other towns as well. But carry on with your specific questions to Old Saybrook, please.
And that's a good point, Suzanne. Gateway has primarily been protecting the scenic quality of the lower river, but more and more they've been delving into ecological protection of the river, because as the health of the river goes, obviously so goes its beauty. And just another comment that in terms of jurisdictions, Marcy and I have been coordinating on applications for years. Marcy will write to me and say, what did you and Gateway think of this particular application? What thoughts are you having? Do you have any concerns? And so we've coordinated for years. So there is a really great interconnection between DEP, coastal management, and the Gateway Commission.
Yeah, I second that. That's a good point, Torrance.
We have a question from Doug McCracken.
Hi, Doug.
Hi, Torrance. Thank you for the overview. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
As you know, about less than 3 weeks ago, the Gateway Zone and part of the shoreline all the way to Westerly got the designation of National Estuarine Research Reserve.
Mhm.
That feels like one for your trophy case.
Yes, you know what? I should have, you're absolutely right. I should have put that there.
Yeah. And but my question is, the announcement said the University of Connecticut will serve as the lead state partner in the daily operation and management of the reserve.
Mhm.
So, I know this is brand new, but can you just comment on what the designation means, and is there any overlap there, or how does this fit in with the Gateway and DEP, et cetera?
Well, Gateway is very excited and supported that effort, submitted letters of support as I'm sure many of your organizations did. We were hoping, I think, it was hoped that the office, the main office of the Research Reserve would be here in the lower Connecticut River, but at least for now, it's over at Avery Point. Suzanne, do you want to comment on behalf of the commission? What our thoughts are about the NER?
Yeah, I think the fascinating thing about a NER, other than it's a mouthful to say, is and I've been involved in years of input and comments on this all along the southeastern Connecticut shoreline. It deals with submerged lands and waters. It doesn't see NERs, because they are administered by NOAA, don't see themselves as dealing with watersheds or upland water. They would probably refer you to the Long Island Sound Study or some other partner organization. So they're very much water specific, water focused, but what runs, what goes on the ground runs into the sound. So we're all partners together. And it makes logical sense that the first headquarters for the NER would be over at Groton, Avery Point. I do think there will be opportunities over here on the Connecticut Riverside. Let them get going. But what they do is monitoring and research. They are an academic organization, but it provides so much opportunity for all the organizations that care about the water resources and the land above it to provide input and to feed into various studies and observations and to raise questions. So it is a bit of an academic and research oriented exercise. Bear with it and let it get going. I think it will only benefit our region. And hopefully, we all love the lower Connecticut River Valley. We don't know how to refer to it. We have that challenge, but we know it's special. And so figuring out how to protect it is going to be very important. And that is a very important cornerstone. It's the only NER in Connecticut. And we're very fortunate that it's in the eastern end of the state, not the southwestern end of the state, where there's bigger pollution problems.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I see
Bill, did you
Fan.
want to add some?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Gateway has had to, been asked to work with Phragmites issues. And one of the issues with the Phragmite is there's a fair amount of discussion about, is the cure worse than the condition? And we're hoping that the NER will be able to provide some wisdom and research on these types of issues, how best to address Phragmite. I just throw that out myself because the hope is that a regional approach with cutting edge science coordinated will help us all work on this problem together. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
That's a good point, Bill.
We also have a question from, or something to say from Christina White. Christina?
Hi, Christina.
Yeah, hi. I'm with the Lyme Land Trust and I'm also on the Planning and Zoning Commission in Lyme. And one of the things that has come up on both is scenic easements that are held by Dept. And it's been kind of it's very vague as far as what we are and the challenges. And I'm curious what their thoughts, I mean, they own these scenic easements, and how far down on the food chain is the importance of these, and are they enforcing them? And having a scenic easement is all well and good, but who actually enforces that?
I can offer an answer, Christina. And yeah, we've had a few of those in Lyme of late. The Gateway Commission through the years has been involved as a middleman for these kind of easements, where property owners who want to restrict how much development might go on their properties would negotiate with the Gateway Commission and either donate in most cases, but sometimes sell these kind of easements and development rights. And then the Gateway Commission, which isn't structured to hold those easements like a land trust would be. And I know Lyme Land Trust has so many protective easements, the busiest land trust in the lower Connecticut River. These easements are then transferred to the land acquisition group at the DEP for ultimate stewardship. And what has happened of late is that second or third generation property owners will look to develop their new properties. And it's those of us at the local level who will often have the information that there is a scenic easement that was placed on that property, for instance, in the 1980s through Gateway, but now held by the state of Connecticut. So in that case, Ross Byrne, who is the CEO in Lyme, the Planning and Zoning Commission, with Ross as their lead staff, and I will communicate with the land acquisition group up there and deliver plans and discuss what the DEP thinks of a particular plan and whether it's consistent with the scenic easement, because the DEP is, after all, the holder of that easement. So we have coordinated in that fashion on some of those recent easement questions there in Old Lyme. And what has happened is the land acquisition group has recognized through the years that the Gateway Commission is the scenic authority in the lower Connecticut River. So if they're posed with a question like that, they will turn to the Gateway Commission for Gateway's interpretation of whether holding the line on that easement is important to the Gateway's scenic protection duties. And there's one recent one where an application for a dock was submitted for a property at the mouth of Hamburg Cove and Lyme. And it was a property where a dock had been requested, I think 2 times in the past since I've been working for the Gateway Commission. And the first time the easement was sent to the Attorney General in Connecticut, who confirmed that that easement actually precluded the construction of a dock. So that's the message that the property owner got, and the DEP denied that particular application. So there is interconnection and coordination between the town planning and zoning commissions, and in the case there in Lyme with Ross Byrne, the Gateway Commission, and the DEP. So we keep an eye on those kind of historic easements in that way. Does that answer your question, Christina?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
David, would you like to say something?
Yeah, Torrance basically answered it, but if I could illuminate it a bit, eternal vigilance is the price of a conservation easement. So, and it's not only the owners of these properties that have turned over, and the new owners, as Torrance said, are very interested in getting around these easements, and they have lawyers and consultants who want to help them do that. But we've had staff turnover. Some of our regulatory staff are not aware of the history of some of these sites. So it's really important that we all touch base with each other. And if a town commission or Gateway sees something or hears something that doesn't sound right, then by all means, let either our office or land acquisition know. Because they will try to get away with stuff, as I'm sure you know.
David, I cannot resist to say this, but as you move off of government roles, I think you would be an excellent consultant and speaker at CLCC conferences on how to make sure that the next generations understand what the predecessors put in the conservation easement or the previous owners. So I think that's a real shoring up that needs to be done for holders of conservation easements.
You've got a new retirement job, David.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'll add it to my list.
Like Marcy, David is a colleague from my time at the DEP and a good friend, and he will be greatly missed by the Gateway Commission for his knowledge and wisdom and dry sense of humor. It's been years that he served, and he was a great representative and a great member.
Well, thanks, but I'm not dead yet. I appreciate your kind words.
Monty Python. I'm not dead yet.
So earlier I saw Chuck Gayden's hand go up and down, so I'm not sure if he still has a question. He does.
Is Chuck asking a question?
Got it. I unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Torrance, I have a question. It's in regards to properties along the water in Gateway. And like when we go to look at properties, and I'm on ZBA, I'm the chair, and I see things like these psychedelic playscapes or these retractable awnings. They don't count as bulk, but how do you handle that?
I'm trying to think. Well, first of all, the gateway standards and the gateway process is based on zoning regulations. At this time, I'm not aware that Old Saybrook or really any other town regulates those type of features as a structure. At some point, a town may adopt a definition and say that something like that is a structure that has to, meet setbacks, et cetera, et cetera. And then that kind of puts it in Gateway's lap to make comments about something like that. And as Suzanne mentioned, primarily Gateway looks at the visual bulk, the envelope of a building and how much is presented to the river. Some newer members have recently asked questions about features like that. And that's something Gateway hasn't started to consider making comments about, especially if it's not a quote unquote structure that's regulated by the town. If it were, Gateway might make a comment that, ask, could those things be a darker color? They seem to really stick out. Is there any way to place it in the visual footprint of the property or of the house so it's not kind of extending to either side and drawing the eye? But those type of features, I would say, Gateway doesn't delve into those necessarily because they aren't defined as structures in the town of Old Saybrook or the other 7 towns along the river.
And I agree with you.
Accurate, Chuck?
One second. And I
Does that
agree with
answer
you
that?
on, I agree with you on that. It's just that these structures are like, some of the stuff we see is pretty unique, to say the least. And we're trying to be good stewards of the Gateway, and we won't even get involved in them. That was my concern. And and I'd like to thank Chris Costa, who invited us from to this evening. This has been an amazing presentation. Thank you.
That's awesome. Great.
Well, the ZBA in Old Saybrook, I often cite as probably the most supportive and strong ZBA of the 7 towns. All of them are strong, but when Gateway has made recommendations to the Old Saybrook ZBA, the ZBA has always supported Gateway's comments and concerns. And when conditions are requested, the ZBA always seems to place those on the local approvals. So that's something that is very valuable to the Gateway Commission, because the authority, especially for variance applications, is the ZBA. The Gateway is making suggestions and asking for conditions. So thank you to you and your colleagues as the next generation of ZBA watchers of the river.
Are there any other questions?
Chris, I would just say, one, thank you very much for this. 2, Diane and I represent the town. And as you can tell, there's a pretty good line of communication between Torrance and Chris. But should anyone ever need to talk about what the Gateway does, Diane and I are obviously available. And our job is to represent you on the commission as well. So please reach us. And also any ideas on new approaches or new issues we're missing would be great. And thanks, Chris, and thanks, Torrance.
Bill is probably of recent members, one who is more in touch with local town staff and really understands what's going on at the local level than a lot of other commission members. And that's always helpful that, there have been times where, site reviews for variance applications, Bill and Diane's a newer member, but we'll meet Chris at the site with the architect, and all of us will discuss to get a better understanding of what's on the ground. And it's great when one of the commission representatives is that involved. It makes their decisions even that more helpful and provide more guidance. So thanks, Bill and Diane.
And thank you, Torrance and Bill and Gateway for all your support, as well as Marcy and David and our DEP contacts, or DEEP. I still go back to the old school deep, or because without the coordination that we have as staff members, we would be so behind and in so much trouble, and we just work so great together. So thank you for coming out tonight and for speaking. And I see we do have another question in the audience for
Yay, we
Andy.
love questions.
Chubb, you out there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. My question is, what is the this has come up several times in the old Saybrook ZBA. What is the rationale behind the 15% coverage for areas within the jurisdiction of the Gateway Commission versus the 20% that we have in our zoning code?
Shall I take this one, guys? I'll take this one. And this question, as Chubb said, has come up before. My thought on that is when these gateway standards, and there are newer ones that you have now that were adopted in 2004, but that 15% ground coverage limit was one of the first adopted in 1973. And the thought at that time was the residential zones all along the river for the, I think exclusively, have 20% ground coverage limits as their requirement. I think the Gateway Commission thought originally that to reduce the amount of visual bulk, instead of 20%, we'll go with 15%, and that will result in less development that you can see from the river. I think, Chubb, you had asked, is it time to look at that restriction again to see if it should remain 15%, or should it be elevated to the 20% that the towns currently have? That's something the Gateway Commission has discussed, not in a lot of detail, but I think it's something that the Rules Committee will look at as part of their agenda. And what I can say is, since 1973, there's been so much more development that in a lot of the properties, if you think of the size of a structure that's seen from the river or from the coves, if you take 5% more of the ground coverage and add that, perhaps because of the density that exists nowadays, it isn't thought to be as significant as perhaps it might have been back in 1973. But it's often said if variances are requested of a particular regulation a lot, perhaps the regulation should be looked at. And I kind of thought this question might come up tonight, but it's something that Bill Webb and the Rules Committee will likely take a look at and see what they can come up with.
Well, I thank you. Just as a member of the ZBA here in Old Saybrook, and as a property owner where my house is subject to your jurisdiction, I really encourage you to revisit that. Not that I'm not going to rebuild my house. I'm set. But I think I have a hard time justifying turning down somebody who wants to develop their lot the way everybody else in our town can develop it just because they're visible from the river.
But Chubb, I mean, that's the whole point. They are visible from the river.
I know.
I mean, but I'll tell you what, we will look at it. I also, not directly related, but at some point, we're going to have to think about affordable housing and issues like that.
Correct. That's my concern, among others.
But You know, it's also, if we relax somewhere, we can tighten somewhere else. So, I mean, there's you know, I'm not going to commit to anything right now, but we will look at it.
And I appreciate that. That's great. I'm glad
And,
you are.
But it is visible from the river, and that something is in the Gateway Commission, the Gateway Zone, is the regulation applies because they're in the Gateway Zone. It's not unfair. The house is in the Gateway Zone. Anyway, I'm going to just again say thank you, Chris, for organizing this, and I'm going to mute.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chubb.
Do we have any other questions?
No, I'd just like to thank everyone also. This has been a great opportunity for us, our office and me, and I just really admire volunteer local commissions. I've worked with them for a long time, but I think there's a commitment and a devotion there, especially to a very special area in the lower Connecticut River. So I just appreciate everything everyone does. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chris, for organizing.
Marcy, thank you for coming out, you and Torrance, with your presentation tonight, as well as Suzanne and Bill and Diane and David and Katie, who've all contributed to this, as well as there was 36 or 37 people on this meeting, which is terrific that there was such a great turnout on these subjects. I'd like to do this again, and if anybody has any ideas for topics for another meeting, it could be a follow-up on Marcy's presentation or other ideas, please send me an email or call me, or if you want to speak up right now, that's fine too. But I'm really fortunate to work with such great people and be in a community with such volunteerism and interest in preserving the shoreline.
Thanks, Chris.
And as a
Good night.
Saybrook resident, I'm thankful for all of you too. And don't hesitate. There's my email address, my Gmail address. If anybody has individual questions, shoot me an email. And I do that a lot with the Gateway Commission and residents and commission members, et cetera. So don't hesitate to email.
Yeah, and same for me. Anyone can email me anytime with any questions. It's marcy.lalint@ct.gov.